Anything you guys say now is being recorded for posterity.
I'm going to give it a minute here, and then we'll get going. So.
You're a good looking dude, Tim. Thank you, Lane. I don't know what you're buttering me up for, but thank you. We get to be in the peanut
Oh, nice.
I'm calling you that one right now.
I got a haircut yesterday, actually. Okay, we ready to go, you think? All right, I think we will get started. I hope everyone out there can hear us. We've got a full house here in the Lodi Wine Commission offices and visitor center to taste and discuss our Lodi Native project that we are all very proud of and have been working on for the past 2 years. Let me quickly introduce myself. I've got I'm Stuart Spencer. I'm with the Lodi Wine Grape Commission and have been for the past 14 years. To my right here is Todd Maley, who's one of our local wine growers and participant in our Lodi Native project. And to my left is Chad Joseph, who is the winemaker for Todd's winery. And in our studio audience, or peanut gallery, whatever you'd like to call it, I've got the other 4 winemakers involved in this project: Layne Montgomery, Mike McCay, Ryan Sherman, and Tim Holdener from Macchia Wines. Just a little brief history on Lodi before we dive into the project. Lodi is a region that sits just south of Sacramento and east of San Francisco. It's a very historic wine growing district. When you look at California, we've been growing grapes here dating back to the 1850s. But for most of the past 150 years, Lodi has thrived as basically a grape growing region, living in anonymity within the California wine industry, because most of our grapes, for the better part of that time, were going into large California appellated wines. Over the past 20 years, we've seen the emergence of a small kind of artisan wine movement that has really taken hold in the last 10 years with the launch of many new labels and new brands. And with that, we're starting to see many of these great old vineyards that Lodi has really get discovered and show the quality that they can do. When you look at Lodi, one of the things that we think really separates Lodi and makes it unique in the world of wine is its treasure trove of old Vine Zinfandels. We have thousands of acres of these old Zinfandel vineyards, many of them dating back to the early 20th century, 1900 into the 1800s. I think our oldest vineyards date to the 1870s. Many of them are still on their own roots and thriving today. And they're just now starting to find their way into single vineyard wines and show what they can potentially do. This project, the Lodi Native project, came about 2 years ago, and you can go to our website, lodinative.com, to get a little bit more background on the project and the protocols. But it came about 2 years ago when Randy Caparoso, who works with us at Lodi Wine doing our lodiwine.com wine blog, got a group of us together, Zinfandel specialists, and suggested we look at a project similar to the Coro Mendocino project of doing kind of a regional focused wine. And as we began those discussions, we started talking about, well, how are we going to make them? The goal of the project from the beginning was what can we do to really showcase these old vine vineyards and remove the winemaker and the winemaker's style from the winemaking practices and really highlight the terroir and the site specificity that we see out there walking the vineyards, but many consumers haven't had the opportunity to do. So that was probably in about January of 2012, and over the course of the next 6 months, we met regularly and dickered about the rules and protocol of what we were going to do and what we weren't going to do. And with each meeting, we took more and more things off the table to when we finished up, we were left with, we were going to use old Vine Zinfandel vineyards, we were going to use native yeast fermentation, there were going to be no additives, no acid, no water additions, no enzymes, nothing of that sort. And all the wines were going to be aged in neutral oak barrels so that there be no oak influence in the wine as well. For some of us, this was a first experience with native yeast fermentation and kind of, as I think Ryan likes to call it, winemaking without a net. And it very much was that. And I think as we go through this tasting, each of them will kind of describe their experience. So I think it's best to start moving on to the wines. Let me go quickly through the wine order we're going to do so that you at home can follow along. The first wine we're going to be tasting is the Maley Vineyard wine. And then secondly, we're going to go into the M2 Suzy Vineyard. And then the third will be the McCay Cellars, followed by the St.Amant Marian's Vineyard Zin, and then the Fields Family Century Oak, and finish up with Macchia Noble Vineyard. So without anything further from me, actually one last thing. We usually do these things in about an hour with six guests and 6 wines. We may run over a little bit. We hope everyone can stay till we finish, but we'll try and keep it as succinct and to the point as possible. But I think let's move on to wine number 1, which is the Maley Vineyard. So Todd, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about the vineyard?
Sure. Yeah, it was planted in 1958 on St. George rootstock. It's a 9-foot by 9-foot vineyard. It's sustainably farmed. We farm 320 acres in Lodi, and our family concentrates mainly on Zinfandel. We have a good reputation, and Chad here is my winemaker, so he'll be explaining the wine a little more as well. Nice, sweet, ripe fruit. Gets about 3 tons per acre. And
Well, yeah, Todd and I have had a long history of making wines, probably close to about 10 years. And so when we had a chance to jump on this project, the cool thing is we can do a lot of different things with vineyards in Lodi. A lot of times the styles of wines being produced in the past have been the really ripe, fruit-forward style. So getting together on this project and kind of getting back to focusing on the more textural, tactile, elegant flavors of the vineyards was really exciting. So I've done a little bit of native fermentations in the past. I incorporated in my blends. So to do that 100% and to really try to harvest at lower bricks and to kind of capture the concept of this project, which is to really define what Lodi is as a wine growing region, was kind of exciting. So what we see in the Wiget Vineyard is it's over on the west side of Lodi. Over on the west side, you tend to have a little more of what I'd call clay in the soil. It may not be as sandy as what you would see over on the eastern side. It is alluvial deposits from the Montgomery River, but we end up with a little more herbal notes on the wine. So you get that really nice cherry, bright flavor, and we also did a little carbonic maceration. So a portion of, this is uninoculated wine, but a portion of the lot, we put whole clusters in there. So we try to capture, I think it'll age really well, but you get a little bit of that herbal, minty, and that's typical of the west side of Lodi. You may see that when you taste Layne's wine. He has a vineyard, the Suzy Vineyard, which is very close to this. So it's a really fun project. I'm learning a lot. It's great collaboration with my fellow winemakers. And
one of the questions, I don't know if you saw, Chad, was how do we get 6 winemakers to agree and put personal style aside? Do you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah. You basically you make it to where they can't do anything. So that's there is no personal style. That's the cool thing about the project. There's no oak ads, no acid ads. So I think the biggest thing is getting us all to see the value of that. But the cool thing about the project is that really there should be no quote unquote winemaker influence on a wine. It's just really us shepherding the grapes through the winery and having the grapes turn into wine without us influencing it. But we've had a lot of fun and a lot of banter and a lot of.
Yeah, I would suggest it's been like herding cats for a great part of the exercise for the past 2 years, especially when we were trying to work on label designs and bottles and corks and foils and all those things, and agreeing upon things was a bit of a challenge, but it all came together.
Yeah, definitely.
So
definitely.
One of the things I wanted to touch on that I didn't when we said the wine order, the other thing we're doing too with the wines is we're moving from the western side of the McCay River AVA to the eastern side. So the first wine, the Maley Vineyard, is the westernmost vineyard, and then we'll move gradually from west to east. And when you look at Lodi and its old Zinfandel vineyards, most of them sit right around the city of Lodi within the McCay River AVA, where it's very sandy soils, and phylloxera doesn't do very well, and some of these old vines have survived on their own roots for quite some time.
Yeah.
Chad, do you have anything else you want to offer on the winemaking?
It's been fermentation. We destem the grapes. There's no crushing, so we try to keep as much whole berry as possible. It took over 14 days to finish fermentation, and still, when we pressed it and put it into barrels, it goes natural ML. It's still working. We rack it one time to do the sulfiding for aging, put it back into barrels, and then it's pretty minimalist on the approach. And I think with that whole berry and the carbonic, I mean, you really capture that zesty mineral kind of character that you can get out of Lodi Zinfandels. I love it. I mean, it's kind of inspired me to make more wines in the style, so it's super exciting. I'm happy to be part of the project.
Yeah, I think it's one of the interesting things, is I think all of us that have gone through this have found it rewarding and have expanded our use of native fermentations in some of our other wines, and gradually introducing it into some other vineyard blocks and varieties, and to me that's kind of been a rewarding experience of it all.
Absolutely.
So the one question out here is decisions on how long to oak left to each winemaker individually.
Yeah, this wine I think was bottled first. I mean, this really only saw 9 months in the oak. So we say no winemaker style. That was kind of a decision that I thought I could influence the wine, and being more carbonic, bottling it sooner with less age in the oak. Whereas some of these wines have seen over, I would say, 16 to 18 months of barrel age. So I wanted to lessen the oak aging as far as what the oxidation or the progression of the wine would be due to the aging in the oak barrels.
And I think, when it was one of the things that forced all of us to push our comfort zone, because some of the winemakers like longer cellar time, but because of the project and the timing of it, we were kind of all forced to bottle within a certain window. So I think the Maley was the earliest bottled in July, followed by three of them in August, and then the last two were bottled in November. So there's a fairly tight window, and that would be 2013.
Yeah.
9 months of oak. What type of oak?
It's neutral. So these barrels were, I would say, well over 6 years. There was one French oak barrel, and the other one was a European barrel, if I'm not mistaken. But these barrels had seen at least 6 different vintages. I really wanted to take any type of oak cannon, flavor, aroma out of the equation, and just have the oak barrel be a storage vessel.
So
for the wine.
Wine on the Road is wondering in Denver, is winemaker style obscure terroir? It's kind of a loaded question.
I think it can. I think over a heavy hand on a wine with oak, decisions on when to harvest, over ripe fruit. I mean, those are things that you can take any grape or any wine, and that'll be a consistency within the wine. So you definitely can over dominate the terroir of the wine. So absolutely.
One more question here, and then we'll try and rotate in our next studio guest. Did the results of the project cause you to rethink your personal winemaking style? If so, what was this process surprised you the most?
The process, it just reaffirmed my desire to push the envelope on the different directions. I personally love making white wines. I think picking grapes at a lower Brix, capturing more of that natural acidity, and I'm personally in the pursuit of texture and tactile sensations, mouthfeel. So it's reaffirmed the belief that you can actually have more minerality and more of the natural texture at lower Brix, which a lot of times people thought you need to have higher Brix for flavor pursuit. But I see that it's reaffirmed, that belief.
So it looks like Wine Harlots is cheating, and she's jumped ahead and tasted through all 6 Lodi Native Zins and commenting on how different they are. And I would agree too. It's been one of the things that's amazed me in this process is how close these vineyards are together and how different the wines really are. And you'll see that as we go through it for those that haven't jumped ahead. So let's thank Todd and Chad. They will stay here, and if Mike and Layne can come up, we will move on to their 2 wines. Bring a glass with you guys. So I'm gonna grab number 2 here, which is going to be the M2 wine, Suzy Vineyard, and pour it for my friends here, and. You got 2 glasses, Layne.
They said bring a glass.
So, Layne, we're going to start with the M2, so why don't you start telling us a little bit about the Suzy Vineyard and your experience with this project.
All right. Suzy Vineyard, S-O-U-C-I-E. Kevin Suzy is the grower. This vineyard was planted by his grandfather in 1916. The original 6-acre block is the one I'm referring to. It's self-rooted, head-trained, DeVries sandy loam. It is the westmost vineyard in the project. It's within like a half a mile. You can see Maley from there, the Weegate Vineyard. But it's very distinctly different. This one has a lot of earth, a lot of loam. I love this vineyard. I've been making wine from this vineyard 12 years, and it's amazing to me how consistent yet different it is. To make this wine, we picked about 750 pounds at 22 bricks, because one of the rules was no acid addition. And then we picked another 1,500 to 1,700 pounds at 24, 25 bricks. And then it's all blended together. This wine to me, because there was no yeast additions, no malolactic, no new oak. Again, we destemmed, didn't crush, just destemmed the grapes, put them back in a bin, and they sat there and mocked me for 6 days.
That's pretty standard.
Yeah, I get a lot of that. But it was amazing how long it took for this stuff to take off on fermentation on its own.
How many days?
It was 6 days just sitting there, and then after that, it was probably about another 10 days before we pressed it and punched down.
So solid over 2 weeks.
Yeah, about 2 weeks.
One of the questions that just flew by, Layne, was a lot of these West Side vineyards are near dairies or dairy ground. Has there been any nitrogen issues in the vineyards because of proximity to
I would not say
cows?
Because of that. I would say Kevin is trying to get his vineyard to live another 90 to 100 years, and he, in the past, has been very aggressive with nitrogen additions. I would get Yan in the vineyard, in the must back in 07, 08, 09 in the 400s. So it's extremely hard to control fermentation. He's really backed off the nitrogen additions. I don't think you're going to get any nitrogen blown in from the air. But that has been an issue with his vineyard, with crop load and speed of fermentation and so forth. But we've really dialed it back within the past 5 years or so.
Another question is, I realize style should be off the table, but would you say when to pick bleeds into personal style? You want to answer that?
I saw stickers on cars for a few years, that oval sticker that says 26.2. I didn't realize that meant they were a marathon runner. I thought that was their preferred bricks level. Minimum bricks. Picking Zinfandel, yeah. That's and Ryan says it's a little low.
Layne's clearly never run a marathon.
I've never run. I run my mouth. Yeah, this was. There was a question earlier. This make you rethink your style. Yeah, The flavors I love in Zinfandel, though, develop when it gets up there. 25, 26, 27. But that becomes a real challenge in the winery to make a balanced wine. Wine's all about balance: acid, alcohol, fruit, oak. This has caused me to rethink some of that.
Well, we kind of had our handcuffs on a little bit with all
Yeah.
the rules.
With all the rules.
But that was nice because it really shows off the terroir of Lodi.
Yeah.
What's going
Yeah.
on, these special vineyards.
Well, McCay's a longtime fan of native fermentation, and I'm a little skeptical.
So another question just popped up is, do you think the Native project will have an effect on the way the region looks at its potential as far as wine-making styles go?
Hey, that's a good question. Lodi gets criticized for making high alcohol, overripe fruit bombs, and I think that's totally wrong.
Is everyone going to change their style maybe a little bit because of the project? Guys?
It's going to make me think a little bit.
Everyone's kind of nodding their head that, it has a little bit of influence, so the answer would be yeah.
And I would answer also too. I think when you look at Lodi from a winemaking standpoint, we're still in our infancy. When most of these wineries in the room are less than 10 years old today, and I think as we learn the vineyards more and discover it, I think one of the things we're showing is Lodi has a much broader range of styles that come from the region. It can make very light, delicate, delicious wines. It doesn't have to be all big and fruity style zins that the region has become known for.
And you think about that. You think about Zinfandel. Zinfandel is a kind of a blank canvas. It's so broad. You can do so much with it. There's not a
Zinfandel is America's grape, and so there's no old world style to compare it to.
I mean, the six of us all have our different style.
Yeah.
But that's just Zinfandel. It's great, and you can make it in a certain style that can be appealing to a lot of different people.
And there's no wrong style. There is, but
here we go.
It's America's grape. We're all from different places. Define the average American. Well, you can't. Define the average Zinfandel. You really can't.
Right. That's what's fun about Zin.
That's what's fun about it. Exactly.
Afternoon, the barbecue, evening, big dinner. It goes a lot of different places, which is really fun.
Style. Smile about the style.
So, I think, why don't we move on to Mike's wine, and I've got it here. That's going to be the McCay Trulux Vineyard Zinfandel, and keep firing away questions as we get this wine poured.
This is an interesting vineyard. It's going to be, from the Suzy Vineyard, maybe about a mile and a half, kind of southeast from there.
You never fessed up where it's from, that I've heard.
To you.
Yeah.
It's going to be a vineyard that is obviously head trained, very unusual in that the vines are over 6 feet tall. They've got this beautiful ladder effect to them. They produce a cluster of grapes that is very elongated. You get very deep, dark style fruit from it, typically the blackberry, black cherry. You'll get a little bit of tobacco in there, some black pepper. Very unusual style Zinfandel. Actually, the first year I made wine from this vineyard was 1994. In that first year, I guess you said I made a little bit of a mistake, and I had one of my macro bins start on its own in native fermentation, and I've really fallen in love with that style. So when I look at this vineyard, I typically will have 1 or 2 inoculated lots for the commercial side, along with that native fermentation. It's something that is just a different style Zinfandel. For me, this project was tough in that this vineyard usually hits its sweet spot after about 18, 24 months in the barrel. So I was, I think, the last one to bottle, if I remember correctly, which was in November of last year. And it just, I can see it's evolving. We actually had the opportunity last night to do a tasting with a group, and we've been tasting these wines now for several months, and I'm just blown away at how they keep flip-flopping, changing, evolving.
They're different all the time. And it's amazing to me too how they have changed and developed in just since the last time we've done it.
And I mean flip-flop not in a bad way, in a way that they just are evolving and changing. The new nuances to the wines.
That's what's fascinating about it.
It is, and it's fun to see. And to me, it just absolutely demonstrates the microclimates, the soil profiles, what Lodi is all about. We are definitely not hot and flat, and that's all we got. There's a ton of stuff going on here. There is great vineyards that haven't discovered that have been going 100-ton fermenters for years. We're just starting to find these beautiful little gems and be able to work with them, develop them. And if we didn't have stuff going on in Lodi, so to speak, you'd be tasting 6 wines tonight that would taste almost the same. And they are all distinctly different, and they've all been with crafting-wise, as far as production-wise, for these 6 wines, done the same. So it's really kind of cool to see just how Lodi evolves and the direction and the style of the vineyards, the terroir of the vineyards.
One of our guests is asking, why would your wine have more amber hints in the color?
Just what I'm talking about. The terroir, the climates, you're going to see those different profiles, those different layers, different characteristics of wine come from.
Later too.
Sorry?
It's also bottled later too.
It was bottled later, and you're going to see that the influence from the vineyards, from Lodi as the AVA, will change the wines, and that's what you're seeing in this group here, which that makes me really excited. It's been a lot of fun, actually.
So you've been making wines for several years now, Mike, and you're kind of a fan of the native yeast fermentation. You want to talk a little bit about what you did in the winemaking in this wine?
For me, about 85 on my Zinfandel production, about 80 to 85% each year is going to be native. So to jump in and I'm pretty comfortable with the whole process. I do a couple things that are within the rules, of course, the guidelines. They are.
They're guidelines.
But it's not out of the box for me. I do have a couple different vineyards that I do inoculate with commercial yeast because I like the profiles and the characters that yeast brings in. But if you have well-balanced fruit when it comes in, if you handle it properly, having stuck fermentation typically doesn't happen. And it's something you got to learn how to deal with.
That's a good question.
One of our questions was, one of the questions was, where's the name Trulux come from?
That actually is, I mentioned in 1994, the first year I made wine, was this vineyard. It was kind of true luck that I stumbled on a yeast that I liked and that I actually had a little native fermentation going on there. So it was just kind of lucky that those things happened at that vineyard for the very first time, and I think made a drinkable wine. So that's kind of where the name came from.
One of the questions is, have we done a blind tasting to see if we can pick and identify our own wine out of the 6? And I don't think we have.
We have not.
We always can find lanes.
No, you cannot. Yeah, because it's the best. That's obvious.
No, the fun thing is though, through this process, we've tasted the wines, I think, probably 3 or 4 times before we bottled them at various stages, and then we've tasted them a couple times since we've bottled them, but I don't think we've ever done it completely blind.
No, we have not. And I'll tell you, mine was, early mine was, I thought, extraordinarily unpleasant. Just when it was young, while it was just post-malolactic, just a lot of strange off aromas, and it's amazing to me how it has come back together and turned into a nice bottle of wine.
I don't think we touched on yet the fact that they're all unfiltered too, the wines.
Yes.
Which is, I think, pretty neat. You've got wines that you are basically tasting from the process, from the vineyard to the bottle, and are just that. They're a great representation of the vineyard and what the characteristics from that vineyard are.
So one of the questions was on retail prices. They want to know how much these wines are, and so this is our commercial interruption here. The wines are $35 individually a bottle, or we're selling them through the Lodi Wine and Visitor Center in a 6-pack, one of each, in a commemorative wooden box with the Lodi Native seal on it too, for $180. So that works out at $30 a bottle. We packaged up 120 of these for sale here through the Visitor Center. A good portion of the wine is being used for promotional purposes like this, to send out to media and trade, to showcase Lodi, and then a little portion is left for ourselves to sell to our own wine fans and clubs. One of the other questions too was about, are we going to make these wines available in other parts of the country? And we'd be happy to send it to anyone that wants to pay money for it. But
yeah, very limited production for most of us.
The production, did we say how much was actually produced?
Yeah, each of us did about 50 cases of it. I think Jenny was going to maybe add it to the page, but she just tells me she hasn't done that yet.
When there's what is your favorite food to drink with your Lodi Native? I never know how to answer that question about food and wine pairings. Somebody says, what should I pair with a bottle? I always say, how about a second bottle?
I always say, what's the mood?
Yeah,
what's the food? What's the food and what's the mood?
Yeah. Good food wine to me makes you hungry, makes you think of something to eat with it. So
I want to have another glass.
have another glass. I'm thinking pork chops right now.
No, but so getting back to the production, we each did 50 cases. I think Tim had to outdo us all, and he did about 100 cases. But it is very limited, and we each did it again in 2013, and I think we did a similar amount. So it'll be limited in the coming year as
I did
well.
102 cases.
So, no, we each didn't make the same. The one question is, do we each make the same number of bottles? I mean, could you imagine us trying to agree upon producing the same number of bottles? It was hard enough to get everyone to agree on the protocols and the packaging and everything else, let alone producing, 362 bottles or something like that. So we basically said make a couple barrels, and we'll see where it works.
I think most of us too did different lots, different vineyards, just to
Waka Waka
kind
had a
of check it
question.
out.
Celebrity to compare your Lodi Native Suzy 2012. I don't know. I do another Zin from this vineyard that I call Velvet Elvis.
So I think what the question was is, how would you compare your native Zin to your more commercial version of it?
Oh, well, yeah, this is minimal intervention. It's just pure fruit, the vineyard showing itself. My other version is picked riper, more oak, it's darker, it's going to age more. Mike, what about yours?
As far as which I like better,
Well, how do you compare your Trulux and Lodi Native to your regular Trulux bottling?
I mentioned earlier that for that vineyard I had two different yeasts that I actually use, and the Native, which is the dominant, about 2/3 of it. And I like them all three by themselves, but I think something kind of special happens when you put them together. So I would be a fan of the commercial bottle over this.
More complexity, more
complexity,
more stuff going on.
Yeah, one of the questions that
Randy likes the other one.
Yeah, one of the questions that just came up was, how did we choose the wineries and vineyards to participate? It's a very interesting question. I think Randy Caparoso got a group of us that had all kind of specialized in Zinfandel together, and we sat around for months discussing this, and we came up with the protocol. And at that point, we actually invited out to about another dozen or so winemakers to see if they'd be interested in participating in 2012. A couple were interested, but it just didn't happen for them at harvest time, and we ended up with the original 6 of us.
I think we were just the ones naive enough to go along with it.
Could be. So that's kind of how we did it. Another question is, what's our philosophy on SO2 additions?
Minimal, what's necessary. If you use too much SO2, you bleach out color, you bleach out flavor. Especially at high pH winemaking, you can't control all your microbials with SO2. So you just want to keep them to dull roar. Sanitation in the winery is super critical. You got to do some SO2 for antioxidation, antimicrobial, but I keep it to a minimum, probably to my detriment.
I was probably 25 parts going in the bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah, SO2 was the one thing we allowed the winemakers to do in this project. So there is SO2, but I don't think anyone went very crazy with it. So I think we need to move on to the next wine, which happens to be mine. So I need to find a glass here in which to pour it.
Has anybody tried to blend all these together?
Yes.
Tim has. Last night. Oh, I want to give a shout out to my sister who's watching from Colorado. She,
Hey y'all.
hey y'all.
So
Hi sis.
So the fourth wine we're gonna, now you guys can stay here. The fourth wine we're gonna do here is the St.Amant Marian's Vineyard, which I don't think I said at the beginning, but hopefully it's clear by now. I'm one of the winemakers in the group as well. My family's been making wine here in the region since 1980. I took over from my father when he passed away in 2006. We've been working with the Moore Fry Ranch, Jerry and Bruce Fry, since 1996, making zins from those vineyards. And the Marian's vineyard is a 8.3 acre block of own-rooted Zinfandel, planted in 1901, just south of the city of Lodi. So when we're talking about going from west to east, this vineyard sits directly south of the city of Lodi. It's kind of in the middle of the east-west divide that kind of divides much of the McCulmy River AVA and the Zinfandel vineyards. So this vineyard also has its own rooted. It has underground drip irrigation that was put in about 20 years ago. Runs down the center of the vine, or center of the rows where they historically were furrow irrigated. I think it's one of the things the growers did that's helped rejuvenate and bring some health back to this vineyard. When these vineyards were originally developed back in the early 1900s, they weren't leveling the fields quite like they can do today, and so you have these undulations that go through the vineyard, and when you're furrow irrigating, you're going to have wet spots and dry spots, and you end up with unbalanced and irregular vine development in there. And this one with the drip irrigation underground, we're able to get the water and nutrients to where it may be needed to keep them healthy. They are own-rooted, lives in very sandy soils. Nematodes can be a challenge, but so far so good. And this year, 2012, was a very large crop year for Zinfandel. We actually got about 4 tons to the acre on a 111-year-old vineyard. So I think that shows that the vines still have a ways to go. One of the things that I think, and I just lost my train of thought. One of the things that I think is interesting about the vintage too, and the year of this project, is I think I at least got a little lucky in it, in that we normally will see a 2 to 3 degree soak up in the fermenters. When we pick these grapes, we'll pick them, let's say 25 bricks, and in years like 2010 and 2011, there's a much larger, the sugar keeps coming out of the skins as they're soaking. In 2012, with a larger crop, we didn't have near as much shrivel in the vineyard, and it was easier to kind of pick the starting bricks, and we didn't end up with the must soaking up to higher sugars, which can make a native fermentation much more challenging.
Did you see that question there? Somebody's asking, if you picked at that low bricks, how did you end up with that high alcohol? And it's the soak-up factor.
It is the soak-up factor. And one of the interesting things is, so we were all a little nervous and thought we were going to be smart, and so we tried to, some of us tried to pick earlier than we normally do, and I picked, an earlier batch of this, and the grapes came in a little warm, and really native wild fermentation got started, and the wine got pretty funky. So then I said, well, a week later, we said, let's try it again, and we did it. We did it again, and the second batch, went much more slowly and fermented more consistently, and ended up with a more balanced and approachable wine.
Bricks from first to second pick?
The starting bricks weren't that much different. It was really, I think the first one we picked, it was like 24.2, and it didn't budge. It just stayed at 24.2, and then the second picking, we picked around 24.5, and it maybe soaked to...
And how long between the two picks?
About 10 days. Week to 10 days.
That's about mine. I picked early 22 bricks for the acidity. I was trying to get it. That vineyard especially can go real high pH, real low acid, so I picked early for acid. And
one of the questions on alcohol and zins, and I think when we get to Tim's wine, the last wine, it'll illustrate. Sometimes certain vineyards give you, certain wines with certain levels of alcohol, and I think his Noma vineyard tends to be in that style. It's a very low-yielding vineyard with very small clusters can really...
There's a great question about the suitability, the Lodi Rules suitability program. talk about it a little bit.
Sustainability.
Thank you.
So, for those that don't know, and I'll try and do this quickly because it's a fairly complicated program we have, but about 20 years ago we started a sustainable program with our growers here in Lodi, and in 2006 we launched California's first vineyard sustainable certification program. It's a comprehensive program that assesses the growers on a whole range of practices in the vineyard. They have to do certain things to get qualified. The program is independently accredited by a third party called Protected Harvest, and then the vineyards are individually audited to make sure they're complying with the practices.
I'm pretty sure that all 6 are.
Yeah, I think at least 4 or 5 of them are. I think one of them might not be, but we didn't put the seal on the bottle.
Suzy Vineyard follows the rules on sustainability, Lodi rules. I never have gotten around to, getting a seal on there.
Yeah, one of the comments was a little funk is a good thing, and I guarantee, when we were tasting these first,
They were funky.
They were the first go that we had these. I think it was probably January after harvest.
Yeah.
Tim was giving me the funny eye there. He's like, "What did you do to
There's
this?"
a lot of looks in that room.
Yeah, they were like, okay, this is a dumb idea.
But we gave the wine some time, and they resolved themselves. And I think there was a little bit of faith-based winemaking going on with what we were doing here,
Yes.
and fortunately, it worked out.
Amen.
So, and one other question: how many more years can Marian's Vineyard produce bold, concentrated fruit? Hopefully, many more, because I've got a long ways to go still. Any other questions? Let's see here. I think
Let's get Holdener and Fields up.
Yeah, I think we need to get you guys out of here.
Yeah, they're tired of us.
So we'll move on from the Marian's Vineyard Zinfandel, and we will bring in Ryan Sherman with Fields Family and Tim Holdener with Macchia wines. I actually encourage you to do your own blending in-house. We did this last night just for fun, and it actually made a pretty interesting wine when you poured equal parts of all 6 wines together. It's one of the fun things we get to do in the cellars from time to time. So let me find my 5th wine here, which is our...
This is Century?
Yep, which this is the Fields Family Century Block Vineyard, and I'm going to let Ryan tell us about this vineyard.
I'm going to pass
Is it
it
yours?
around. Sure, it is now. Okay, so as they're pouring, right now you should have, and I see a few of you, I saw Wine Harlots and one of the others had tasted ahead, so shame on you for not playing nice. But you've got the 2012 Century Block Zin, really a neat vineyard, working on trying to get it back. I'm going to take Tim out there, wherever Tim went. There you are. I'm going to take Tim out there. We'll see about getting some fruit from there. 3 acres, own rooted, planted around 1905. Best records we can tell. The first time we made a wine from that vineyard, and that it was bottled on its own for many years. As far as all the owners and farmers can tell us, is that's always been scraped into the larger bucket for Gallo, Constellation, whomever. So we were able to get fruit from that 1 year only, unfortunately. But neat spot. There's some Tokay vines scattered throughout there. There's some Grenache vines scattered throughout. And you can really see the disparity in vine size as you look at the vineyard, because it's you can stand up in the back of my pickup truck and look out over the vineyard, and you see these short, squatty little vines and bigger, more robust wines. And it took us a couple years of working with the farmer just to kind of rein it in. He had always kind of let it go California sprawl, kind of a little bush wild. And I think for this year, we made our own wine out of there, besides the wine from the Lodi Native project. So fun vineyard. And Layne from M2 and we shared that vineyard for that 1 year. 3 acre patch, pulled out around 9, maybe 10 tons total. Some years was less, some years more. What's that?
Elaine's making fun of us.
I can't read that. So.
She says the 6 of us were selected because we looked good on camera, which Yeah.
She's three-quarters right.
Elaine's much too generous, but anyways.
Or mocking us.
Yeah, mocking us, yeah. Anyways, no, it's a fun vineyard to make wine from, and again, most of our protocol and how we're making wine at Fields Family Wines, and kind of what McCay was talking about earlier, we will inoculate some vineyards, some wines, but depending on the year, 85 to 95% of the wines that I produce are really along this protocol anyway. We went through kind of a grand experiment year in 09 with barrels from various coopers and different yeast strains, and kind of went back to what we originally started out doing, is because we could only afford to buy neutral barrels. This is what now we're kind of swung full circle and are using mostly neutral barrels. I think last year I bought one 600-liter puncheon for our entire 1,600 case production. So we don't use much new oak at all. Once filled and all the way down to neutral barrels. Native ML, native fermentation, all of our wines, regardless, except for the white and the rosé, are unfiltered.
One of the other questions that came up a little bit ago was, did we change our approach in 2013, or were we more comfortable with this in 2013? And I think probably all of us were a little more comfortable with it, having gone through it once. And I think in all cases, I think we actually extended it into other blocks and other varieties, which I think is one of the exciting things of this project.
I actually made it part of my protocol and used native yeast in several vineyards that are not going to be represented here today, or maybe in the future, but they are part of my blending programs to produce vineyard designated wines.
Somebody was saying that they picked up a little bit of funk in the Marian and mine also. I didn't pick that up a little bit, but I do. As you guys know, or a lot of you know that are tasting along with us, we do a Syrah, and I do like a bit of funk in my Syrah. So maybe that kind of bled over into the Zinfandel a little bit.
And another question is,
funk.
Is there
James Brown funk.
Is there anything you're
James Brown.
You guys are getting me off track here. Is there anything you're taking away from this project that you plan to use in your everyday winemaking?
Like I said before, I am using it now as a tool during my harvest to produce a little bit more complexity in some of my bottled wines that have the Macchia signature style.
And I would say in my own winemaking, I've never intentionally made a completely native yeast ferment. Oftentimes they've started on their own and we've subsequently inoculated it. But I think, and I think one of the things that brought all of us to this project, I think we're always experimenting with what we're doing and trying to make better wines that really reflect Lodi. And so I think this is just an evolution of that winemaking style.
I think that's part of being a winemaker, is just always being curious. I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I've tried different skin fermented white wines, rosés, barrel fermented, everything else. Layne thinks it's a different type of curious, but yeah, he's probably hopeful.
What a quick question was, on the vineyard size of these different blocks, and I think the smallest is probably 3 acres, and I think the largest was 30 acres. And I think they all ranged in between there. And then Elaine is asking Tim if you could expand more on the taste or texture difference you see between wild fermented lots versus inoculated.
Well, I come to winemaking with more of the brewing background, so I made home wine for many, many years, and you can use the exact same ingredients, weighed to the exact ounce. And the wines the beers that were produced from those were absolutely different if you just changed one thing, if you just changed the yeast. So I kind of came into this experiment kind of kicking and screaming. If there was anybody that complained every time we met, you were taking away one of our tools, you're taking away the water, you're taking away the acid, you're taking away the yeast, what are we going to do? I was the one that was probably protesting the most. I probably had the most to gain by doing this, and I actually learned an awful lot about it.
I think Layne squealed more.
Man, Layne.
But you did a fair bit of squealing too. With that in mind, I think it's a good time to move on to our sixth wine, which is going to be the Macchia wine, Noble Vineyard. Did you want to say anything else, Ryan, on your vineyard and wine? Okay, we can come back to that.
Let's get Tim's in the bottle here.
Here we go.
While you're transitioning, Stuart,
Yep.
here's a question here. In your opinion, should these wines be enjoyed now, or how, if so, for how long?
You want to address that, Ryan? Ageability of the wines?
Ageabilities, I don't, sometimes is always a leading question. You know what? I think all of these wines have a decent amount of acid to them. There is, some have a little bit more tannin than others. We only bottled mine I bottled November 27th, and I think Mike and I were probably the last to bottle. I think they are all going to hold up in age over time. For me, Zinfandel is one of those wines I look at as it could hold up in age, and I'm looking back on our wines that are 3 to 5 years old, and I'm really enjoying them now. So I think they will continue to hold up in age quite well across the board. But I always look at Zin as one of those wines that pop the cork and enjoy it now, and don't wait for that special occasion.
Yeah, I drink Zin right out of the press. That's my special occasion.
I think I'm going to differ here a little bit in that, I used to be of the opinion that and recommend drinking our Zins within 3 to 5 years of bottling, but we've been working with our Marian's vineyard since 1999, and last month we had a tasting at the winery and opened a 02, 03, 06, and an 09, and I was surprised at how well and fresh the 02 and 03 were still tasting, and the 06 was still very lively. So I think in our normal winemaking we're fairly minimalist in our approach to it. We do inoculate, but I think one of the misnomers is that these wines can age. All wines age, it's just a matter of whether they age to your preference, but I think with Zin, you still want to see some of those fresh fruit flavors that really distinguish Zin.
Yeah, it's nice to see the evolution of the wines. I mean, as even pop a cork, and if you're diligent enough to kind of let it age and open up in your glass and kind of evolve over 3 or 4 hours of drinking that, or pacing yourself out over several years and trying these wines. It's nice to see the evolution of the wines.
Yeah, and then the question will be the question would be whether they the native ones age longer than the commercial versions, and I don't really know the answer to that. I think some people would say yes, they might because they're lower alcohols, but I think that'll be left to time to tell as we taste these wines down the road. One of the questions just popped up there is they want to know what own rooted means, and most vineyards in California are grafted onto rootstock to protect them from phylloxera and nematodes and other root pests, as well as to manage the site and vigor. Centuries ago, this wasn't done, and they would just go stick a grapevine in the ground and plant it. And so that's what it means. It's growing on its own roots. And in my experience, I think it makes a difference in the quality of the wines, and you do get a different character coming through on own-rooted versus grafted vines.
You do take a big chance by not having it grafted onto disease-resistant rootstock, but some of the benefits that outweigh some of the negative things about it. And some of these that are own-rooted, because that's what they did 100 years ago, they didn't have the rootstock to be able to do that, have survived. And they've survived because they were in really special places. Having nice sandy loam soil, real sandy in the Noma Ranch case, really helped that vineyard to be able to live for as long as it has. And the vigor's controlled. There's a lot of benefits to being on your own roots. Sometimes they outweigh the nematodes or the phylloxera issues, but sometimes if you do have problems like that, you don't get a chance to do that. You don't get to do that. So we're lucky to be able to be caretakers of some of these vines. And when you walk through some of these old vineyards, it's not like walking through a normal vineyard, a commercial vineyard, where it might be a commodity. These are really special places, And that was the purpose of what we're doing today, is we wanted to highlight these. We wanted to showcase these. And despite the winemaker style, there's 6 winemakers in here. There's 6 absolutely different winemaking styles. And we forgo all of those just so you can taste what these special places have to offer. And we came up with these protocols not because we liked them or we enjoyed them. We came up with them because we thought these were the best tools that we could use to display what we want to show you about Lodi, what we want to show you about these special vineyards. So
Tim, why don't you actually tell us a little bit about the Noble Vineyard and introduce it, because I think it is a pretty unique vineyard.
yeah, the Noble Vineyard is right on the, it's on an east side vineyard. It is really close to the McCay River, so it is in deep sandy loam soil. But it is encroached by a lot of buildings. There is buildings on 4 sides of it now, and it is in danger of being lost. It is dry farmed. The farmer doesn't make a lot of money, even though he's paid one of the top 1% of price per ton for grapes in the Lodi appellation. He's got to make a living, so I have a product next year. We're going to try to keep it holding on as long as we can. It is own-rooted, and I said he doesn't make a lot of money off it because it only produces 1 ton an acre. Winemaking-wise, that gives me a real nice, intense, concentrated Zinfandel flavors. And typically, this is one of my highest acid vineyards, even more than Sangiovese and Barbera, which are typically high acid grapes, which is excellent for Zinfandels in our area. If we have a knock, sometimes by the time the grapes get ripened, the acids might not be there, but this vineyard every single year comes through, and that's why I chose it as the what I was going to use the Lodi Natives for, because higher acid wines typically has lower pHs, they're easier to control microbes, and that's something I was very worried about. Again, coming from the beer background, everything has to be clean, sanitized, sterile.
Somebody had made, I don't know where the scroll had gone down to, but your finished wine, I don't know what the label says, but that wine is approaching what, 15?
15, high 15s, and I literally picked this wine at 24.5 or 25 sugar. This was the Noma Ranch for our Lodi Natives was picked 3 separate times. Each time we made a commercial wine out of that batch, but we also made the Lodi Native style wine out of it. And the first one I knew we would be able to get through the ferments. The second one, kind of iffy. The third one did not go all the way through. I actually had to add yeast to it, and I took it out of the program that we were using because of, well, if we're going to make rules, we might as well follow them.
Well, I was having an ongoing dialogue with somebody on Twitter about the alcohol levels, and whatever we put on the label is, there's some varying degrees of what it actually is, based on your labs, but it's not about the alcohol level, it's about balance, and that wine, even at the alcohol level, it's remarkably balanced. It's got a really pretty acid to it.
Yeah, trust me,
enjoyed it.
Nobody in this room wants to make a 15 or 16% alcohol wine. We don't wake up in the morning and say, this is what we want to do, we want to show this world what it's all about. They're a lot harder to make. If we can make our style of wine that we want to make as a winemaker at 14% alcohol, our lives would be so much easier. But a lot of time it's a trade-off. Everything that we do is a trade-off. You want the flavors here. Well, sometimes you have to take the alcohol hit to be able to get to those flavors, or you got to dilute it with water. And this Lodi Natives product really taught me a lot about my picking practices for one, and then my winemaking practices as another. I'm lucky that it went through at 15.8 because native yeasts aren't really known for high alcohol tolerance, and it is one that probably fermented 6 months after the barrel. After we barreled it down, it was still fermenting. It was blowing bungs out all springtime.
One of the questions that came by a little earlier, and Ryan, I'll let you maybe answer this, is why Lodi and Zinfandel? What is about Lodi that Zinfandel does well here?
You gotta let the Zen master answer.
I'll
give you my 2 cents worth. No, the climate, Mediterranean climate. Obviously, everybody touches upon that. I think we get some great temperature swings here. Being close proximity to the Delta. Zinfandel's always done well here. Whether you go to the own-rooted, really old vineyards, or even some of the old, really old St. George vineyards. Zinfandels can be quite pretty here, and I think from these examples you see today, you can have ours on our label says 14, we're really probably at 13.8, and you can have 15.8 and still have elegance and perfume and balance, and so you can cover the spectrum with these Zinfandels and take away something very nice from these wines. So.
Yeah, the big thing that we wanted to show is that we have a lot of jewels here, and a lot of people don't know about them, and we wanted to showcase them, and we try to think of the best way that we could showcase them. I'm reading one of the questions now that talks about one of my wine club members was in love with the Noma Ranch vineyard, and her husband sadly died, and as a favor to her, we took his ashes and we took them out there, and he is actually part of every vintage now because we spread the ashes out through the vineyard, and there's time to times that she comes by just with me, and this last couple weekends ago with a few other people, shared the fact that her husband is buried out there, and she loves drinking the wine because every time she tastes it, she just thinks that he somehow lives on through what we're drinking.
That's great. That's great.
A few other questions are popping up. What other regions grow Zinfandel? Zinfandel is grown throughout California, and I think, some of the earliest vines were planted in Sonoma and up in Amador County. Lodi was not far behind when the first vineyards went in. You had Zinfandel down in Southern California. Obviously, as the California wine business has developed over the years, areas have become to specialize where you don't see near as much Zinfandel in Napa as you used to. But Lodi and Zin, I think, kind of have a neat synergy here that you don't find in many places, and I think it shows in the wines.
Absolutely.
It brought our community together.
Yeah, and one of the things with Lodi and Zinfandel is we do grow over 40% of California Zinfandel. There are thousands of acres of Zins that have been planted. Many of these vineyards you're tasting today were going for white Zinfandel in the 80s and some into the 90s and probably even beyond that. And that was a good thing for our region because it kept these vines in the ground, kept the growers whole as they continue to farm it. And then as the red Zinfandel market began to develop and vintners like myself and these guys came along, we're finding a home for these wines. So we're about to wrap it up here. So if you guys have any other questions or any other thoughts, well, actually, there's a few more. Are there going to be further ventures with other varieties, and what's the future of this project like? So what do you, does anyone want to tackle that?
It's work in progress. Every time we have a meeting, we have different ideas about what we want to do. Zinfandel was the easiest one because we're all making it, and it is kind of our star right now. But there is a lot of other stories to tell about Lodi, and there's a lot of other great varieties out there. And I certainly wouldn't be against making maybe a Barbera.
I have
maybe
Barbera stays in your wheelhouse.
Yeah,
so
well,
I've got Syrah Tempranillo. We'll do Lodi Native protocol with Syrah Tempranillo, which is already what kind of we're doing anyways.
I think it's...
Mike, you want to do a Lodi Tempranillo Native?
I think it's a challenging question we all feel. I think individually with our own wines, I think this project has kind of opened some doors for all of us as we're kind of experimenting with other varieties and within our own Zinfandels, and I think that's going to improve the quality of all our wines. As it relates to the Lodi Native project, I think we as a group need to get together and figure that out. I was talking with Mike about this yesterday, and I think one of the concerns and one of the challenges we have is how do we maintain the integrity of the project going forward, and we all trust each other here. When we say we did this, and that's important, and we're doing it based upon each other's words, and we believe in each other. And so as we grow this project and potentially bring on new vineyard sites and new winemakers and stuff, we want to make sure everyone comes to it with the same sense of purpose and integrity and honesty that we all did.
we're all committed to 2013, and I think 2014 is right around the corner. It'll be faster than probably we all care for it to be, but 2013 wines are in the barrel resting peacefully. As we speak.
2013 wines are in the barrel, and we actually need to get together and taste them, and I was just suggesting that we do that earlier. So we are about to wrap up here, and I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today. I encourage you to continue tasting these wines. They will definitely evolve as they're left open through today and tomorrow, if not for a couple of days. I encourage you, if you have any questions or further follow-up on these wines or more clarity, there were a lot of questions coming in. We didn't get to address them all. We'd be happy to answer those. Reach out to us at the Lodi Wine Grape Commission, email, phone. We're happy to take your calls. And I want to thank our fellow vintners for taking the time to join us this evening and investing in this project. I think it's been great for all of us, and we look forward to doing more and more of this down the road. So thanks, everyone.
Salute.
Cheers.
Cheers.